Hi, my name is Connor Riley, and on this episode of Connor and Coverage, I'm going to explain why I'm a professional after coming on here and broadcasting after seeing the New England Patriots lose a game in the worst way I think I've ever seen a team lose. Hello, everybody. Welcome in. My name is Connor Riley. This is Connor in Coverage, where we will most definitely not be talking about what the New England Patriots just did, but instead talking a little Georgia football here. A big week coming up. You have the early signing period beginning on Wednesday, running through Friday. Georgia's going to be very busy this week. Damon Wilson announces his decision on Wednesday. Jordan Hall announces his decision on Thursday. There are two big recruiting matchups to watch that Jeff Sentell will be at both of those. Damon Wilson, five-star pass rusher out of Venice, Florida, and then Jordan Hill, a four-star defensive lineman out of the Jacksonville area. Two very important players there as Georgia looks to sort of put the finishing touches up on its recruiting class, as well as the usual big sort of recruiting fireworks we've come to expect to see from Georgia at this point in time. You would expect a lot of these guys to go ahead and sign, lock in their places in the class. I think as of right now, the unofficial early enrollee count is going to end up being at 14. Some of these guys are already on campus rather, and will begin practicing with the team tomorrow. Guys like AJ Harris, Raylan Wilson, a few that have come to name that are off the top of my head there. There's 9 of them in total. Tyler Williams, a 4-star wide receiver, very promising player. One of the 9 guys that is already at Georgia going through practice this week before the Bulldogs move to Atlanta after Christmas break. But sort of the bigger news of today, Deyon Bouie, a Texas A&M transfer defensive back on campus in Athens today visiting. Georgia fans, recruiting fans know him very well. It was this time a year ago. Georgia was making a late push to try and flip him back from Texas A&M. Didn't end up happening. Bouie goes to Texas A&M, plays in 7 games this year. A&M doesn't have the season that many people thought they were going to have, and Bouie, who's from Bainbridge, Georgia, the hometown of Kirby Smart, ends up entering the transfer portal. And this might seem like a transfer portal story here, but it's actually not. This is the Deyon Bouie news, where he ends up, and specifically I think that's ultimately going to be Georgia if things continue to trend in the right direction, actually show why high school importing is so important to Georgia. Because yes, transfer portal, Georgia's going in and getting him out. I think he'd absolutely help out the secondary. I do think he'd potentially have a chance to start in Georgia's secondary next year with Chris Smith moving on to the NFL. But I think what will get lost potentially in this move that Bouie is potentially making, and he's not just going to end up at Georgia, he could end up at plenty of other places. He's a very talented player, but Georgia stands to be in a really good spot with Bouie because they put in such an effort to recruit him a year ago, even after he committed to Texas A&M. And we're going to get into this, and I have a story running on Monday morning about this, how, some Georgia fans, they don't love when guys are committed elsewhere and Georgia is still making the effort to recruit them. Justice Haynes, Caleb Downs, when they've made it pretty clear Georgia's not going to be an option for them right now. And that's certainly the case. You see that with Justice Haynes and Caleb Downs in the cycle. Georgia's recruited both of them very hard. They've also made it very clear that they will be attending the University of Alabama as it stands right now. But who's to say a year from now, much like the case of Deyon Bouie, that we don't see them in the transfer portal potentially looking to play elsewhere? And because of the time and effort that Georgia has invested in them as high school recruits and built those relationships and has a very good understanding of why they might fit in this program, in the event that they do come into the transfer portal, Georgia stands to have a good leg up on them because they've already spent so much time invested in getting to know them and what they are as both football players and as people. And so I think one of the things that we've seen with this transfer portal is there's not necessarily a ton of information out there on these guys, and not everyone is going to be a great fit. For every Darian Kendrick who came in and started every game for Georgia, there's also a Tyke Smith who doesn't live up to the expectations that he had when he first transferred in. And so I think between those two sort of, routes you can go, the more information you have on these players, the better off they're likely to probably end up being hits in your program. And that's why Kirby Smart, who has said time and time again that the transfer portal, there is risk in going in there and taking a player out, not just because they might not help you and fill the need you have. There's also the fact that, and I'm not saying anyone that they've taken out of the portal has done this, but it might upset some guys in the current locker room and impact your current team chemistry. And while Georgia's still very much playing for a national title in this season, that's where it makes it very different. And it's a tough needle to thread. Imagine you being a wide receiver who's coming back next year, and you're seeing Georgia's going out there, they're recruiting Ra Thomas, they're recruiting Dominic Lovett. Dante Cephas from Kent State has an offer. They're clearly making some pushes to add talent to that wide receiver room in addition to the 4 recruits that are expected to sign with Georgia this week. But because of the way this Georgia team likes its players, the mental makeup, the way this lineup has been built, they have to understand that, hey, we're always going to be looking to add players and get better. And I think knowing that and knowing that players can handle that starts with recruiting them in the high school ranks. I sort of asked Kirby Smart earlier this month, why in an age where transfer portal, and you see TCU this year, USC, schools come in and have such immediate success with the transfer portal. Why is it so important for you guys to continue to build through the high school recruiting ranks? And I actually think Kirby Smart's answer was really illuminating, and it's backed up what you've seen them do in terms of going out and trying to recruit guys out of the transfer portal right now. They're not going to recruit and land everyone, but they're going to be very selective in the guys they go after. And there is a reason for that, as Kirby Smart explains right here from earlier this month.
And we've had successful guys come from the portal, and we'll continue to utilize the portal. I don't think it would be foolish to think that you could be successful in college football and not evaluate and recruit and look through the portal. But you have to be smart what you bring into your program, especially if you want to keep a dynamic of the culture we'd like to keep. And I want to be sure you understand, Connor. I'm not saying that we don't recruit the portal. I'm saying that we just did not have anyone last year that we got. We certainly are always going to look and shape it and make sure kids fit our culture. That's why, to me, it's so critical now in recruiting to evaluate more players, because you may get the guy on rebound and you better know a better history than just what somebody calls and tells you about them. I want to know when they came on the visit. I want to know when we talked to them. I want to know when they came to our camp, because I'm a lot more likely to take a kid that I think is wired the right way, even if he's coming from the portal, but I better have known about him coming out of high school.
So, yeah, you have Kirby Smart talking about the importance of getting to know these kids at the high school level. And I think the Deyon Bouie situation really highlights that. This is a guy that Georgia made a very significant effort to recruit and try and land him, the number 68 overall player in the 2022 recruiting class. And just because things didn't end up working out for him at Texas A&M does not mean that they couldn't possibly do so at Georgia. And I think Kirby Smart still sees the value in adding a talent like Bouie to this roster. As good as things are going for Georgia right now, look, Alabama's about to sign the number 1 class once again. Ohio State is consistently a power. You've seen in college football. Michigan has done really good work with the transfer portal, even though their recruiting rankings have maybe dropped off a little bit here. You've always got to keep doing more, always be recruiting, always be closing, to quote Glenn Ross. And so I think, having put that out there, we asked Kirby Smart earlier this week as well, when you are in the portal, what do you look for? What are the criteria that sort of fits what you go in and try and get? Because obviously Georgia is not for everyone. You've heard multiple players say that time and time again. And I think Kirby gave a really illuminating answer here. And it's similar to what he said earlier this month about fit. And that's what really matters here. And you get a better idea of who those guys are when you get to know them as high school recruits rather than as transfer players, where you're trying to get information from them coming from another school. Well, why didn't it work out there? Whereas if you know them from a high school standpoint, you have a better understanding of what you're going to get.
Well, we didn't make a decision not to go in. We called and recruited several guys that fit our criteria. Number 1, need. Number 2, culture. Number 3, we knew something about them out of high school. They'd been on our campus, but we didn't get any of those guys. So it wasn't a philosophy. It was more of that's the way it played out. As far as this team, I thought in the spring we were going to have a good team. We were a long way away defensively from where we needed to be during the spring, but I knew we had a good football team. I knew we had a good football team when the season ended last year, because we have a core of good players.
So, yeah, again, you hear Kirby Smart talking about his team, and again, when you build through the recruiting rankings, you have guys like Kenny McIntosh and Chris Smith who have to wait their time and becoming really talented players, I do think that makes it easier and more understandable to take transfer players, because those guys are going to, I don't want to say override, but make sure that there are enough safeguards in place to where one bad transfer isn't going to sink this team. And so, it's hard to get on the field at Georgia. There's a reason they're the number one team in the country and have played so well. And so because of that, I think you've seen why the transfer portal has become the sort of fascination that it has with this team. They were the only Power 5 team in the country not to take a portal player this offseason. And it's something that, as Georgia, I think, beats Ohio State, and if they win a national title, it's going to become a very big talking point. But as you've heard Kirby Smart say multiple times now, that wasn't by design. It was just sort of the way things worked out last year. They tried to recruit some guys. They ultimately end up going elsewhere. But they know that the portal is absolutely going to have to be something they use going forward. That's why you've seen them, host Deyon Bouie, host Ra Thomas, host Dominic Levitt, all three guys who are SEC football players already, and try and bring them in and improve that roster for next year, which potentially could even be better than this year's team, which is currently ranked number 1 in the country and is 13-0 at this point in time. That's how highly I think of next season's team. And so I think going forward with this transfer portal and what to look for from a Georgia perspective, look, yes, Marshawn Lloyd went in there, and yes, there have been other talented players that go in there. Not everyone that goes in there is going to be a fit for Georgia. And I think as the transfer portal becomes a bigger and more established thing in college football, again, this is really only the second year where you have the ability to transfer freely without sort of any restrictions. Look, when you're thinking back to, okay, who is a guy Georgia going to go after? Yes, Kirby Smart outlined right there. Right, position of need. How does that help? How heavily were they recruited out of high school, and how they might fit within that team culture there, I think are why Georgia is going to be selective when they use the portal, but there are still going to be talented players out there that look to find new homes. And it's not just Georgia who's using it this way. Consider LSU. They landed today Aaron Anderson, a talented wide receiver who was, I believe, the number 35 overall player in the 2022 recruiting rankings. Doesn't play at all his first year at Alabama, enters the transfer portal, boom, ends right back up at LSU, which was his runner-up in his recruitment last year. So I think, again, to sort of sum all of this up, yes, the transfer portal is exciting. You see big names go in there. Marshawn Lloyd is a name that comes to mind. DJ Unglele, Devin Leary, all these big-time quarterbacks and big-time names. For Georgia, focus on guys that they've recruited in the past, focus on guys that fit specific needs. Wide receiver, very clearly one of them. I think safety is a position of need for Georgia, which is why I think Bouie makes a lot of sense for this team. I would maybe say edge rusher if that possibly comes up. But as Kirby Smart has said time and time again, what you possibly need might not come available in the transfer portal. It's rare to see offensive and defensive linemen that can make impacts, be difference makers, enter the portal. And so that's why a lot of times, Georgia's not necessarily going to use the portal to build out their team the same way a USC did this past season. And so I think it'll be interesting going forward what the evolution and what this next step looks like for Georgia. It's more of a, last second replacement kind of thing rather than a true team building way of improving this roster. Whereas I think you look at a Florida program right now going into the second off season under Billy Napier, they're going to have to really try and overhaul that roster even more. And going 6-7 this first season, a recruiting class that is probably going to end up finishing outside the top 10, it puts a lot of strain on your program to have to rely on the portal like that when you might not get the players you need out of there. And so that's why, Kirby's not going to dive all the way into it, but more often than not, Georgia's probably going to take at least one or two players out of the transfer portal. And I think this past year will prove to be more of an anomaly when it comes to that. So that's our sort of big thing on recruiting, high school, transfer portal, the importance of all of it. And so with that, let's go ahead, open it up for questions, thoughts, comments you guys might have. Obviously, the early signing period begins on Wednesday. Damon Wilson, 5-star prospect, is announcing that day. Jordan Hall, 4-star defensive lineman, is announcing on Thursday there. Daniel Harris, a 4-star cornerback, is a name to monitor as well, though it sounds like he may be trending towards Penn State. At the moment, Georgia, as it stands right now, has 23 players committed in the 2023 signing class. Most of those I would expect to sign on Wednesday, lock in their place in the class. I believe 14 of them will be early enrollees, with 9 actually already practicing with the team on Monday. I'm going to try and get those 9 off the top of my head here. You have A.J. Harris, the cornerback, Georgia's, I believe, highest rated commitment at this point in time, 5-star player out of Phoenix City, Alabama. You have Raylan Wilson and CJ Allen, two very talented linebackers. I think Wilson may end up being the best player that Georgia has signed in this class as it stands right now. You have three wide receivers, Tyler Williams, who is the highest ranked of the three, Anthony Evans out of Texas, the speedster that flipped from Oklahoma, and Yazid Haynes, another speedy wide receiver from Pennsylvania. So that gets us up to 6. I believe Lawson Lucky will be arriving early and practicing with Georgia this week, and I believe Jamal Jarrett will as well, which gets you up to 8. And then I want to say there's one offensive lineman, but I am blanking on who that is right now, and I'll open up comments and see if someone can help fill me in there. But it's on dognation.com. We've wrote it and said it before. 9 guys will be practicing with the team tomorrow. And so busy week ahead. Obviously, Georgia continues to practice ahead of the game against Ohio State, while also having the obvious recruiting big mixer on early signing period Wednesday through Friday, along with the transfer portal. You're probably going to see more and more players commit and lock in and decide where they want to go and get that done, especially with, the importance of high school recruiting to so many programs. Let's see. Light Dog brings up Jeff Sims, the former Georgia Tech quarterback. He is going to Nebraska. I see some people commenting on Dylan Raiola. Yeah, we can talk about him here for a second. The number 1 overall player in the 2024 recruiting class. Decommits from Ohio State this week. It became public knowledge on Saturday. Obviously, a player that Georgia recruited over this past summer and made, I think, a strong push to try and land him. Jeff Sintel and myself have talked about this, and I do think that from a raw tools standpoint, I would say Raiola has more talent and upside than Arch Manning. Backs off his Ohio State pledge. He's got family ties to Nebraska. His father played there. His uncle is the offensive line coach there. He's got a sister that currently goes to TCU. And when you look at what TCU has done, say, for Max Duggan, as well as Sonny Dykes' past work with Jared Goff when he was the head coach at Cal, you can see that being an attractive offer. And then you have USC and Georgia who are going to make pushes to try and land Raiola, I believe. Kirby, just because they have Ryan Puglisi committed and they like what they have in Puglisi. When a talent like Raiola comes available, I think you have to look around at him. And you can look back to last year in the transfer portal when Caleb Williams was out there potentially available. Georgia was briefly mentioned there, and I'm sure they kicked the tires on Williams given what he has done at USC this season in Oklahoma last year. So I think Georgia's going to recruit Raiola, but they know, hey, look, we have a really talented player in Ryan Puglisi who this staff really likes, who Todd Monken really likes, and is already committed to Georgia, and is someone who I think, as he plays more snaps, is going to become a bigger part and really climb up those rankings. You've already seen him do that for a number of the recruiting services out there, but Dylan Raiola is definitely a name to know and follow for Georgia. Timothy Burrell. In particular, I'd say if you can get one of the SEC wide receivers, whether that be Ra Thomas or Dominic Lovett, if you can get one of them, I think you feel pretty good there. If you can get Deyon Bouie, if you can get Bouie and then a wide receiver, I think that probably you feel pretty good about what you get there. Taking 2 wide receivers, I could see, but I think they were probably only going to be able to take one because as it stands right now, Georgia is not set to lose definitively anyone from that wide receiver room next year. Now, you're going to see guys transfer out after the season ends, but I do think that wide receiver is a pretty big need. I would say safety is the other one. If there's an edge rusher that comes available, maybe, but I don't think there's going to be one of the quality that Georgia is looking for, and so that probably ends it there. They'll check around and see if a really talented player who has not yet entered the portal elects to do so. But I think right now, one wide receiver and a safety, which I think Bouie is that safety, and one of either Thomas or Lovett as the wide receiver options, I think would help a good bit there. Let's see. Scrolling around, yeah. Let's see. Kirby's belt. I actually think Auburn's probably going to end up getting Grayson McCall, the Coastal Carolina quarterback. But Kentucky, I think, is going to be an attractive option as well, especially with it look like Liam Cohen coming back to be their offensive coordinator. I was very impressed. Philip Sharp. This is Kyron Thomas. So the interesting thing to note about Thomas, the current NC State running back commitment, Georgia is actually recruiting him as a defensive back there. And so I think if Georgia does flip him and they're going to make an effort to do so, it'll be interesting to see how that ties into the Bouie news. And if, Georgia does land Bouie, does that make them less likely to land a guy like Kyron Jones? Let's see. David West, I do think I think with what we've seen from Georgia in big games this season, Oregon, Tennessee, I would throw South Carolina, LSU in there as well. When this Georgia offense needs to be at its absolute sharpest, it has been this season. They've been devastating in those games, and I would expect to see that once again, especially early in that game in the first half. I think that has made a big reason why Georgia has been the number one team, is they have come out and played really well in the first half, specifically in the second quarter there, and that puts so much pressure on the opposing team to try and keep up. Philip Sharp, it is worth noting that Bo Hughley, I believe he tweeted on either Saturday night or Friday night, that he is still very much committed to Georgia, and I expect him to sign with Georgia this week. So I do not think Hughley will be flipping to Auburn, though it did certainly look that way for a while. Baba Yaga on Twitch. I mean, look, I think this Michigan offensive line was actually probably better than it was a season ago. And look, Georgia's offensive line, while very good at times this year, there were also some times, I think we all can agree, it left things to be desired, specifically in the red zone and in short area situations. You think back to the Kentucky game. The guard play was not as flawless as I think the tackle play was this season. And so you could pick nits there. I will just note, and I tweeted about this, if you're Michigan, you probably don't want to see Jalen Carter in the national championship game, because he destroyed them a year ago. And while, yes, this Georgia defensive line isn't as good as it was last season, I still think as a whole that they are going to make things very difficult for that Michigan offensive line and really that entire Georgia front. So I understand why Michigan won. If I'm a Michigan fan right now, I may not love the idea of, oh, great, we have to go see this Georgia team once again that pretty thoroughly embarrassed that offensive line a year ago. Now, that's a proud group. They're going to want to go out there and show that, hey, we're a better unit than we were a season ago. But I absolutely believe that not only will that be a motivating factor for the Georgia defensive front should they meet Michigan, and obviously they have to beat Ohio State to do it. I think for the Georgia offensive line there as well, guys like Xavier Truss, Tate Ratledge, Warren McClendon, who I believe is going to end up playing in that Peach Bowl college football playoff semifinal at right tackle. Those guys go out, play sharp, have really strong games. Let's see. I seen a lot of questions about Brock Vandagriff, and I think Georgia's going to work very hard to try and get him to stay through spring practice and have him compete through there, because as it stands right now, Georgia only has 3 scholarship quarterbacks for next year after not taking a guy in the 2023 recruiting cycle. And so that's going to put a lot of stress potentially on if Vandagriff does leave following the end of the season. So I think Georgia's going to keep this an open competition for as long as it can. They're going to give Brock every chance to try and win the job. But at the same point in time, the writing may very well be on the wall at the end of spring practice. And I think, quite frankly, Carson Beck is probably going to be the guy who is starting for Georgia next year. And while, yes, Brock Vandagriff is a 5-star prospect, at the same point in time, I've been really impressed with what I've seen from Carson Beck. And I would note as well, Gunnar Stockton has made some real strides and has really impressed that coaching staff. So I think if you're Georgia, yes, you have to be wary of it, potentially, seeing Brock Vandagriff leave. But I do think as of right now on December 18th, I would say that's more likely to probably happen after spring practice than before spring practice. And I point out here as well, for any fretting that might come from that, if Justin Fields doesn't enter the transfer portal when he does, Georgia does not bring Stetson Bennett back to this program. And while plenty of people will complain about Stetson Bennett, he's absolutely made this program better, winning a national championship last year and then being a Heisman finalist and the quarterback for the number 1 team in the country this year. So let's see. Comments, questions, thoughts. Jack Marino, yes, Dominic Lovett has been offered there as well. Lovett has not been as public as Thomas has been. I believe he's received visits from, this is Thomas, from Ole Miss. They seem to be a real big competitor for for Rob Thomas at this point. I know Auburn believes it is in good standing with Thomas as well. It seems like he is going to be staying within the SEC at this point. Let's see. Yeah, I see some people talking about Deuce Robinson. He is going to take his recruitment to February. It's also worth noting here that he is a elite baseball prospect, and there is a very real chance where Georgia signs him, but he ultimately ends up electing to play baseball as he gets a top draft slot, top money there. And so that'll be something to watch and develop for Deuce Robinson over time. Let's see. Let's see. Scroll down. Interesting thing on Mississippi State, they have named Zach Arnett as the full-time head coach. They're a guy who I think is going to be a very good head coach, one of the sharper defensive minds in college football. He is replacing Mike Leach after just the sudden and tragic loss of the legendary football coach. So yeah, it'll certainly be something to watch there. Chef Jason Bowen. So Jackpot Lesney does still have another year of eligibility, and he has not yet made a decision on what he is going to do. I think there's a very real world where he comes back. They have a commitment from Peyton Woodyard, I believe. One of them. There's also a 5-star safety in the 2024 class whose name is Peyton Wood, and it's either Wooding or Woodyard. They have a commitment from him, the kicker Peyton Wooding. And then they also have Jared Zirkle with this team right now. And so they're going to have options at that kicker spot next year, even if Jack Podlesny does elect to move on. But it's not certain yet that is something he will do. Yes, Kirby Visor. Bo Nix announced tonight that he is coming back. The Pac-12, with Bo Nix coming back, Michael Penix coming back, Caleb Williams at USC, that league is going to be very, very good next year. Let's see. Alex Waller, yes, this is. They offered a running back from NC Central or NCA&T. Blanking on his name. I also probably couldn't pronounce it as it stands, but yeah, they do make an offer there. I think they're going to be active in the transfer portal to try and probably bring in another guy. They wanted 2 running backs in this recruiting class. They're probably only going to get one with Roderick Robinson coming in, and with Andrew Paul coming off a knee injury, I think they're going to want another back to have and possibly be healthy, because you saw times this year, Kenny McIntosh, Dejon Edwards, Kendall Moulton were all banged up and missed portions of the season. Branson Robinson was really the only running back to be fully healthy throughout this year. And with the way Georgia wants to play going forward, I think you can never have enough healthy, capable running backs. So I do expect Georgia to go out and try and find a running back in the transfer portal that fits what they want, what they are looking for. Because Kenny McIntosh will be gone. But as it stands right now, I'd probably say that Kendall Moulton does come back. But there's also a world out there where if Kendall plays really well in the 2 college football playoff games, sort of like he did against LSU, I could also potentially see a world where he says, maybe I try and showcase my NFL value, because he has battled injuries before. And if he shows out and has a big game, I could certainly see that on the table. But as it sits right here on December 18th, I could certainly see Kendall Moulton coming back. And if he comes back for Georgia next year, I think the Bulldogs are going to be in a very good spot at running back, even if they do have to ultimately end up taking a transfer running back as well there. Let's see. Comments, thoughts? We'll maybe do one more. Yeah, so Young Dre, he brings up the Florida game. This won't be the last comment. We can never go out on a Florida comment. Look, Billy Napier's in trouble. Not like going to lose his job trouble just yet, but I mean, when you see the success that Sonny Dykes had year one at TCU getting into the playoff, and you see the success Lincoln Riley had year one at USC, and you're Florida, and you're going 6-7 in that first season, and you're needing a last-second field goal to avoid getting shut out in a sad field goal situation, I think that's really, really telling of where this program is right now. And look, you can try and flip that roster via the portal, but the needs that Florida has might not be there. And Anthony Richardson is a really gifted quarterback, and I don't believe got the most out of him this season, and now he's off to the NFL. We don't really know who Florida's quarterback is going to be next year, and there's a lot of question marks heading into year 2 for Billy Napier. And when you lose to Vanderbilt, when you lose by almost 30 to Oregon State, a lot of the year one goodwill goes out the window. And while, yes, I think you can be excited potentially if you're a Florida fan about what they're doing on the recruiting trail, it's worth pointing out that right now, I believe Florida has the number 9 recruiting class in the country, the number 10 recruiting class in the country. Dan Mullen's first recruiting class, a notorious non-recruiter, was 9th at Florida. So it's not necessarily like Florida is recruiting leaps and bounds better than what they were under Dan Mullen. And so I think that's the real scary part. While, yes, Billy Napier is a better recruiter than Dan Mullen, it's not showing up in the talent that they're bringing in and the gap that exists between Georgia and Florida in terms of the types of class they're bringing in. There's a huge difference from the number 2 class in the country and the number 10 class in the country. And under Napier, I think they envisioned, hey, we're going to be able to sign top 5 classes. I think you can look at the difference between what Georgia was doing in recruiting under Mark Richt when they were recruiting in that 6 to 10 range, whereas with Kirby Smart, they've consistently been in the top 3 with the exception of 2016, his first, when he got 3 weeks to essentially, or 8 weeks rather, to put together a recruiting class. And then 2021, they had the number 4 recruiting class in the country. Let's see. We'll maybe do one more question. Foster Moss, the Florida 67ers. That's a good one. Let's see. Yeah, I've seen some people asking about Marshawn Lloyd, the South Carolina running back. Georgia obviously recruited him. I would not expect him to end up at Georgia at this point in time. Let's see. We'll do one more question. You guys have been really good tonight. And obviously, no show next Sunday as it is Christmas. But after that, college football playoff week is here. And we're going to have a ton of content for you guys over the course of the week. Let's see. Which draft eligible players end up coming back? That's a good question for us to go on because it's certainly something to consider over the next couple of weeks. So I think Jalen Carter and Keely Ringo, I think those guys, obviously, you expect them to go to the NFL draft. They're first-round draft picks. If you're a first-round draft pick, you should go. Broderick Jones, I would expect to go as well. I think he's going to be a first-round pick. I think Darnell Washington is going to be a late first or second-round pick. I would expect him gone. I think Cedric Von Prawn is going to be one of the first centers taken. I would say he probably leaves. Kenny McIntosh is certainly gone off to the NFL. I think, he's graduated. He's put his 4 years in here and has shown that he is an NFL caliber player. I like Marcus Rosemy-Jackson is a guy who's draft eligible technically, but I would expect him to come back. Warren McClendon is one to really watch if you're a Georgia fan because he could possibly go pro. He's been here 4 years. He has his degree. He graduated this past Friday. And there's a question of, well, how much better is he going to get? He's already started at Georgia for 3 years. And while he might not be an obvious, first 2-day pick, he might have accomplished everything that he wants to. By the time it comes for him to make an NFL draft decision, he could have 2 national championship rings as a starter at the right tackle position. So, I think that is certainly one to watch there. On the defensive side of the ball, obviously we mentioned Carter, we mentioned Keely Ringo. I could maybe see a guy like Nas Stackhouse going off to the NFL, but I think Warren Brinson is going to come back for Georgia, and I think that would be a big win on the defensive line there for them. They're not losing Schmel or Jamon Dumas-Johnson, as both those guys are sophomores. Cornerback, again, you lose Keely Ringo and Chris Smith, but everyone else is projected back. That's why I think next year's defense, if Marvin Jones is able to make a big jump for this team this offseason, I think you're really going to like what this defense does next year for Georgia. And I do think that they are going to be on par with potentially what we saw from last year's defense. They might not be as athletically freaky, but they are going to be an incredibly dominant unit, in my opinion, going forward. So that'll probably do it for us here tonight. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, we do this every Sunday, except we won't be doing it next Sunday as it is Christmas, and I will be spending that day with my family and probably watching the Boston Celtics lose to the Milwaukee Bucks. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Big week ahead of us. You've got Brandon Adams every day with Dog Nation Daily. Mike Griffith with On the Beat on Monday night. Jeff Sentell before the Hedges on Wednesday. He's going to be down in Florida. At that point, he'll be recapping signing day. We're going to do a ton of stuff throughout the day there as well, but obviously his big wrap-up show before the Hedges discussing Damon Wilson, who will commit on Wednesday. Jordan Hall will make his decision announced on Thursday there. So very busy week from Dog Nation. We're going to have you covered because in addition to all the recruiting stuff, we still have the December 31st college football playoff game between Ohio State and Georgia, and we're going to get to preview and talk to Kirby Smart and the team this week. So plenty of stuff coming for you these next couple of days just because of the Christmas holidays, as you can tell by the hat, and the Hanukkah holidays as well. We're still very, very busy here around Dog Nation covering Georgia football. So my name is Connor Riley. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been Connor in Coverage.